All right, welcome back in to the end of Empire, Future of Freedom. I'm going to skip the convener hat and go straight into the panel chair hat. So I'm presenting first the regrets of Dr. Melina Abdullah. She was unable to attend, got called into a final closing campaign activity. She sends her best regards. First and foremost to you, Claudia, and then also to the rest of those that are gathered. The three of us were together not too long ago for an event in LA. So this was meant to a certain extent to be a reunion of sorts. Dr. Abdullah is sending her best. It means that I get to indulge in a 40-minute conversation because you got a hard out at the top of the hour, correct?
Yes, I'm on mom duty, so I have to get to those duties.
And I know just what it is. This is a conversation that you and I have had many times offline. Claudia had mentioned that the only reason why she wasn't able to be in attendance live for this one was because first things come first. And so that's values that we share. So this session is called The Future of Radical Politics. Okay. And at the risk of always being that guy that has too much swagger and is too audacious about it, if Claudia and I are in the same room at the same time, you're looking at the future of radical politics. There's going to be a lot of other people in those rooms, and we got a lot of collective building, to do. But like you and I, have connected since I first joined the campaign, got the chance to join you for a PSL event in Chicago. Immediate feeling on my behalf of solidarity in the struggle, kinship in our priorities and experiences. And the way that I want to use this unique opportunity is to really talk to you, to basically interview you. And I have, kind of three, sorts of pieces that are relatively simple and straightforward. And I want to also invite you to interview me back on any of these. Okay? So the three questions, past, present, and future of radical politics. The first is how did you get radicalized? What was your own personal experiences, one, and two, your own reading of the past, your own reading of history that led to your radicalization. We'll start there. The second one is the present of radical politics. Where are we at now for real though? In this moment, right now, with a raging genocide and two lunatic fringe parties that happen to also be in control of the greatest instruments of surveillance and death dealing ever to exist on the planet. And then lastly, what the panel is actually titled, The Future of Radical Politics. Everybody is all obsessed about electoral politics, but soldiers like you and me know that whatever the electoral outcomes, we are fighting regardless. So what do we start working on beginning on November 6th, no matter the outcome, and how do we carry this struggle forward into the future? Is everybody in the room okay with this intellectual priority? And what about the most important one in the room, the visiting queen? How you feel about the road?
I think it's a great road plan, and I would say you could feel free to answer those questions because I want to hear from you as well. So these three categories I think are essential for us to talk about.
Okay, then ask them back at me at any point, in your own narrative, and I'll gladly accept the invitation to bring it in. Okay, so I heard you answer part of this when I arrived at the event in LA. What radicalized you?
I mean, I grew up, or I came into politics at the age of 13. I am turning 43, God willing, next month. So I've been doing this for 30 years. This meaning organizing, educating, being part of political processes, not only locally, but also nationally and internationally. And in the 90s, there was Bill Clinton, who was in charge. We saw a lot of advancement in the neoliberal project and also a lot of conservatism, right? A lot of restrictive laws against immigrants. We saw NAFTA. Locally, I was engaged in many ways in seeing and being part of communities that were being killed by police. Amadou Diallo happened a year before I became politically active. And many folks in New York City under Giuliani were being harassed, were being racially profiled. And so I think in a lot of ways, my being a Black Caribbean woman from the poorest congressional district in New York City and in the country, actually, raised a lot of questions for me in terms of like, this cannot be normal. It cannot be normal for Black and brown bodies to be dropped in each block and no one's saying anything. It cannot be normal for all these immigration laws to digress, to actually like hunt down immigrants while at the same time advancing NAFTA, which caused migration from Mexico and other parts of the region. And so I was looking to interpret a lot of what was happening, and I came to, or I was brought to by my mom, to a very radical leftist socialist church grounded on liberation theology, where the majority of people were atheists. Highly faithful and spiritual people, but they did not subject themselves to any type of religious grounding. They were engaged in all sorts of campaigns and also all sorts of anti-imperialist work, a lot of them coming from El Salvador, which had a 10-year war that was financed by the U.S., folks from Nicaragua that had the experience of the U.S.-backed Contras, folks who were organizing around the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. So I was privileged to be around a group of very strong socialist, anti-imperialist organizers who were organizing from a faith-based perspective and from a church, which is interesting.
Yep. Can I actually ask you a question there? Because it was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So Kwame Ture once said that when Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, that was only true for Europe. He said that if you study the spiritual traditions of, like non-Western societies, you always find, emancipatory tools for liberation in that spirituality.
I agree. I mean, if you think about, and I don't necessarily, I would just say that there's a ruling class type of religiosity. That there's an instrument of religions as a form of oppression.
Yep.
And if you look at the Haitian Revolution, for example, a lot of what their faith was utilized precisely for liberatory processes. Voodoo was part of that. Yep. And you look at the indigenous tradition. So faith in so many ways has been liberatory for our people for a long time. Now, religiosity, or church with a big C, have been instruments of the ruling class. And so for me, finding socialism in a faith-based organization like the church that I was a part of was not contradicting at all. Yep. It was kind of normal for me to come to church and hear and speak to the war in Iraq and our need to position ourselves against war, our need to position ourselves in solidarity with Cuba, our need to position ourselves in solidarity with Venezuela, our need to be able to advance the struggles against police brutality and against mass incarceration. And again, this is the 90s, right? And so a lot of my understanding of politics comes from a faith in the possibility of building people power. I had the immense privilege of being around people who built the Jericho movement, who were part of the Jericho movement, which is a movement that works to liberate those political prisoners that have sacrificed so much. I was part of campaigns to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to free Leonard Peltier.
Free them all.
That's right, free them all. And so I was really, I think in a lot of ways, and I consider it an honor, I consider it a privilege, but more importantly, I consider that a responsibility. I was given a responsibility to make my life part of a political project that is larger than me. And so I was always part of a political organization. There's nothing more political than the church, so I was part of that church. That was my home church. I ministered that church for 8 years. I went on to become founder of youth organizations that did political education with culture workers. All that work culminated with the foundation of the People's Forum, which is an educational space with socialist values, principles, and history. And it's a hub for a lot of organizers in the New York City area, but also nationally and internationally. And so I came to organizing just from my own context and asking the right questions, and also being surrounded by people who have given their entire lives to build a new system and towards our liberation.
So can I ask another question, like with respect to your own, your own process? I remember when we were together in LA, and I was literally pulling up from a campaign event in San Diego when you were finishing talking about what your trip to Cuba had meant in your own process. Can you like let folks here in this space in on that and where that figured in your life and thinking?
I mean, I think it was a pivotal moment in my life. I had, at the age of 13, come into contact with a lot of socialists. I have come into contact with the Communist Manifesto, a lot of readings, a lot of intellectual debates. But experiencing socialism is different. And obviously, understanding the complexities of having the courage to stand for what a socialist society means in the context of empire is important as well. I went to Cuba when I was 17 in 1997 for the World Youth Festival. And I went, very much oriented by IFCO, Pastors for Peace, which has been organizing caravans to Cuba for over 30 years. And I participated in the World Youth Festival and met amazing comrades from the UJC, which is the Young Communist League, and comrades from the Martin Luther King Center, who do a lot of popular education and actually train people on doing popular political education. And when I went there, I got sick. I got sick because I said, I'm Caribbean. Like, I can eat and drink anything. Comrades had advised us, like, you shouldn't be drinking the water, but I was drinking the water.
By the way, you are me in Senegal, except it was 1996. So I'm going to get to that in a minute, but go ahead, yeah.
I was like, I could do this. My body's built for this. And my body was definitely not built for that. And so I got some bacteria and I was concerned. Like, the immediate thought was like, I don't have health insurance. I don't have money. Like, how am I going to access healthcare if I don't have these things? Now, the most cruel thing, the most horrifying thing is that a teenager at 17 would be worried about not accessing health because they're thinking about how they're going to pay for it, right? Comrades were like, you don't need to worry about it. This is Cuba. And it still didn't click for me until I actually hit the front desk and the person said, what are your symptoms? And I went into shock because it was like, this person wasn't asking me.
What's your insurance carrier?
Yeah. Insurance coverage. And that was my experience in the US. I have sickle cell anemia, the traits. And so every time I got sick, for whatever reason, that was like the first contact with the healthcare system in this country. And to go to another country that obviously has been impoverished because of US imperialism and capitalism, and is undergoing the special period, which is now the end of the USSR, no more support in any way, shape, or form. Cuba was isolated in many ways. And I get to this doctor, and the first question is, what are your symptoms? I was bugging. I was going like, what the, and as the more that I engaged with folks there, I was also in the middle of applying for colleges, right? So you apply for financial aid, you apply for this, they start talking to you about loans. And once I engaged in conversations with other folks in Cuba and said, I most likely will end up with like 30,000. At that point, I was lowballing it because it's been more than 30,000 in terms of student debt, But I said, I might end up with $30,000 worth of student debt. And they said, well, that's crazy because education is a right. Like, we don't indebt ourselves and education is free. And so kind of like coming into contact with the consciousness of people who had been developed under socialism and what they understood to be normal and what they understood my life to be, which was abnormal, kind of gave me a sense of sanity. Like, I'm not going crazy. None of this is normal. It is not normal for people to have to worry about how much they're going to pay for healthcare or worry about how much money they'll be indebted to after they finish their schools. And so I came back with much more of a reaffirmation of what is necessary. And also with an understanding that this country, unlike Cuba, is U.S. empire.
Yep.
Therefore, it is the U.S. empire that makes it impossible for socialist projects to advance. And so what would happen if the U.S. would actually advance a socialist program project presidency? What would it mean to the rest of the world to have the boots of capitalism and U.S. empire off their necks, you know? And what would it mean for the people domestically? Because capitalism is the domestic expression of U.S. empire.
Yep.
And so what would it mean for us not to invest in war, not to invest, you know, in death, destruction across the seas, but actually invest in what we need to invest in, which is the needs of working class people. And so for me, Cuba was transformative and continues to be.
Yep.
A lot of what I know in terms of political education and how to speak to people and how to organize amongst people and how to move hearts and minds comes from being in contact with the Cuban Revolution. So I have a lot that I owe to the Cuban people.
Beautiful. Go ahead. You can clap for that. Go ahead, clap for that. And you sort of guided us right to the questions about, you know, like the present and, you know, kind of the moral and social bankruptcy of our corporate capitalist-driven political system. Like, what do you mean, 35 cents on every healthcare dollar shouldn't go to paper-pushing insurance, people? What do you mean, why? What do you mean education should be a right? What do you mean housing should be a right? What do you mean healthcare should be a right? You asked, so I'll just draw one kind of direct parallel. 1996, I went to Senegal for the first time, okay? And also socialist country, in the French meaning of that term, which is very, very different than the Cuban meaning of that term. It's drained of a lot of its anti-imperialist, content by, kind of the French complicity, French socialist complicity with empire. And even so, that kind of trenchant critique of, capitalism as the basis of normative existence was just threaded throughout the society as a whole. For me, it was probably even more than the critique of capitalism. It was escaping from the matrix of white supremacy that was fundamental for me, right? To be in an environment where people had not been subjected to, having their pasts ripped from them, where people could have, lineage histories and family histories that went back 1,000 years, going to see, literally in the Senegal River Valley, the hearth where they taught the Quran for 600 years. And where one of the West African revolutionaries, Abdul Qadir Khan, that fought against the imposition of the slave trade in West Africa, where he taught his students. You can still go to that spot, like the history is there, live, unbroken. I would just, before we kind of get into the kind of present, I just wanted to ask for a kind of, like what you said was so concise and powerful with respect to capitalism. Would love to hear Claudia de la Cruz go in on white supremacy real quick.
White supremacy is inherently part of the capitalist system. I mean, if we think about plantation politics, if we think about the ways in which capitalism advances and lives and thrives of the exploitation of Black and brown bodies is still a thing,
yep.
Right? When we think about capitalism as it has developed in this country, the down payment for the creation of the economic and political system in which we live today were genocide and slavery. And it continues to be the same. I mean, what else can we call a society that indebts, meaning that enslaves its people,
yep.
the majority of its people,
yep.
the majority Black and brown and poor white working class people, to banks for the most basic necessary things, whether it is for you to actually access housing, whether it is for you to be able to access food. I mean, one of the biggest debts that people have are credit card debts and medical bills.
Yep.
And credit card debt to be able to pay for food, to be able to pay for transportation, right? While the United States of America in its very white supremacist, and its very economic, oppressive forms of existence, does an extermination campaign across the global South primarily on Black and brown bodies.
Yep.
We talk about Palestine, but we have to remember Congo. We have to remember Sudan. We have to remember Haiti. Haiti has been invaded and has been occupied by U.S. imperialism, right? I think it's important for us to bring to light also what Fred Hampton Sr. said. There will come a time when imperialists will be Black. And that is true. The Obamas,
the Kamalas.
For Harris. Yeah, for Harris. And that is true for everyone that actually kisses the ring, having come out of Black and brown communities and do not have the interest of Black and brown people at heart. And so I think, the question of white supremacy is key, but it cannot be isolated from the question of class.
At all.
Because these people may have our skin color, but they're not our kin.
Nope,
they're not our people.
Not.
And so, I could go in on white supremacy. Patriarchy, misogyny is also part of that.
Without any question.
So it's a divide and conquer.
So I wanted to just affirm, and then also just looking at your time and wanting to prioritize your family over everything else. So even the risk of cutting you short. So apologies for that.
You're good.
In this very classroom, I reminded people in my pre-colonial Africa survey that the next time that there's a non-racial capitalism will be the first time it's a non-racial capitalism. Right? That the system was founded on the commoditization of our bodies. And it has now been extended to the commoditization of every aspect of your interior and exterior lives, your tastes and preferences, your data. All of it is now for sale. And that commoditization of, humanity began with us as the laboratory. And then you mentioned Haiti. It was in this also very self-same classroom that I reminded people that war on Haiti began, so the United States of America is the second to last country to acknowledge the independence of Haiti, France, of course, being the last. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the Haitian Revolution was led predominantly by African-born enslaved people that spoke not two words of French, that had military experience from their African homelands and organized their regiments according to African logics, having nothing to do with European systems of anything. They built themselves into the most dangerous army on the face of the earth, and they defeated the most powerful empire on the face of the earth. They bankrupted Napoleon, and the bankrupting of Napoleon led to the greatest achievement of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Extra credit for the class? The Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase purchases manifest destiny for the United States of America, because you are not going to have a settler colony from sea to shining sea if you have the most powerful French post in the middle of that. So when I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis, the star, Lavish and Gabby can correct me, but on the state motto is still L'Étoile du Nord, the Star of the North, the North Star, because everything down the spine of the United States of America, from Minnesota to Mississippi, was all French territories, and those Congolese slaves took it. Because by bankrupting Napoleon, France sold what they owned off on pennies for the dollar. So I sit here in this classroom and say, you kids, when you are drinking in Isla Vista on the weekend, pour one out for them Congolese slaves. Because it ain't no California in your little settler colony if it was not for the struggles of these African peoples. Sorry, taking the attention off of the star of the show, and I'm begging your pardon. But yeah, I have to do the history thing. I literally taught it in this classroom. So we've talked about the past, both personally and kind of collectively, Cuban Revolution, experiences in Cuba and Africa. Talk about where we are now with these corporate thugs that claim to to govern in our name.
I mean, I think it's not fragmented. It's a continuation. It's a continuation of a system and the ways in which it changes its methods, but in essence continues to be the same.
Yep.
And in so many ways, it's a continuation of resistance and struggle and movements that have been dismembered intentionally by that system. I think in so many ways it's important for us to kind of see the continuum of struggle and see where we are today. And that's why I appreciate this so much, the question that you raised in terms of the present, because we have to go back into history. The Sankofa move is a real move.
Yep.
We need to look back to be able to move forward.
Come on.
We can't forget how in the 1980s, there was someone named Ronald Reagan. And how in this particular moment, we have a Harris that's looking to the Reagan administration to get her policies.
Yep.
Everything from her tax policies to her immigration policy. Like, we cannot be clear enough if we disassociate ourselves from that history. And I think in order for us to make the case, we need to bring up receipts. Because and we need to bring up receipts.
Yeah,
we do,
real.
because our people, and I'm talking about the consciousness of the masses, not the people who are in the left or in the progressive.
That's right.
I'm talking about the majority of people in this country have been dismembered ideologically, have been depoliticized, have been detached from that history. And so we have an opportunity, and it's a huge challenge, but we have an opportunity when people are feeling it in their gut that this is not right, that something is wrong, to intervene and orient that feeling of discontent and hopelessness into something that is powerful, so powerful that the ruling class will have to reckon with it. I mean, we have the challenge of actually reactivating communities and having them become politically engaged, and hence the need for political organizations that do that, that actually help people reimagine society in a way that it reflects them. That's a challenge. But we also have the opportunity. I mean, and these are reports that you and I are not making. I mean, these are reports from Princeton that are saying, Brown University, that are saying that 69% of the population in the United States agree that there needs to be a deep economic and political transformation in this country.
Yep.
And 13% of those 69 believe that the system needs to be dismantled completely.
Yep.
It is not you and I that are revealing reports that are saying that Gen Z has become more and more progressive, one of the most progressive generations of our time.
Yep.
And we see it with their response towards the genocide in Gaza.
Yep.
They're unrelentless. They're unwavering. They are, it's not negotiable.
Yep.
They are in the streets every day demanding an end to this genocide. And having a clear understanding that beyond the end to this genocide is the end to the illegal occupation of Palestine by Israeli forces that will continue if we don't stop that occupation to promote and conduct genocide in that region.
Yep.
So our young people are clear that it's not only being anti-genocide, but it's being anti-U.S. imperialist.
Yep.
And so we have an opportunity to intervene in this moment and capture young minds and hearts and people who are tired of the system and activate them to work towards their interests. And so this moment next week is going to be a very, dynamic moment. It's going to be a very dynamic moment where, whoever loses is going to come out and say, well, we lost because of X, because of Y, because of Z, because of the migrants, because of the Green Party, because of the PSL, because of...
They're going to scapegoat the hell out of all of us, so just get ready.
They are going to blame everybody and their mama, but they will not assume responsibility for their deficiency and their inability to respond to the demands of the people. And we have to be there firmly to remind them that they created this grave and that they're going to have to live in it, because we're going to continue to build the movement that is strong enough to reckon with. And that clarity needs to be important, because what we can learn from history as well is that a lot of our movements have been co-opted.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel so deeply with this movement, with this new generation of people that are coming into movement now, is that they're unwilling to be co-opted.
Yep.
These students raised those encampments. They were beaten to the pulp. They were penalized. A lot of them lost a lot of their privileges in these universities, and they continue to organize.
Yep.
And that is a great thing to see, a very inspiring thing to see.
Yeah.
Regardless of whoever wins the position of becoming the tenant of the White House next, we have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to that history we're talking about.
Yep.
We have a responsibility to the Black and brown bodies that were enslaved in this country,
yep.
and to the Black and brown bodies that become part of the mass incarceration system,
yep.
and are lynched. You know, we have a responsibility for the families of more than 800 people who die in this country from poverty-related issues in the wealthiest country in the world. And so if we call ourselves progressive, if we call ourselves radicals, revolutionaries, socialists, we must be engaged in every corner of this country, organizing and mobilizing and educating our people.
Come on.
There is nothing we will gain simply from being politically active every election cycle. We have to do this work every day.
That's exactly it. So I'll underline just a couple of things. Your radicalization began at 13, mine I would say 15, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, brought me to Islam, brought me to the Black radical tradition. Malcolm said, we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized.
That's right.
Right? And he also said, though, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. The reality is that, like, the people that are behind us are numerous and they are strong. Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, who was a direct student of Malcolm, a lot of people, don't realize that, would remind people that usually people are mobilizing around issues, but revolutionaries organize against systems.
That's right.
And that we need to be organizing against systems with multiple flourishing revolutionary parties that are capable of forming coalitions, that are capable of understanding that the movement is bigger than any party, that the organizing is the work of collective liberation. And that this is a fight that electoral politics is only a piece of it, right? The piece of it that matters the most is not giving up on any of the elements of the organizing work until we are all free. The last thing that I'll say before I walk through the door that you open, because you open this door to the future of radical politics by invoking the students. Right? And that's what they are so afraid of. That's why they send in pigs in riot gear right to this campus. Almost 200, cops in riot gear to come move 30 kids off of an encampment. Well, what are they so afraid of? They're so afraid of the future. They're afraid that they have lost this narrative. And to go back to where you started, and I'll just have to say this, Ronald Reagan. In 1982, Ronald Reagan got on the phone in the midst of the Zionist entity's genocidal assault on Lebanon, and he told Menachem Begin that he was engaged in a Holocaust against the Lebanese people, explicitly and intentionally using the same term to use to refer to the Nazi extermination of the Jews. Ronald Reagan, black-hearted son of a bitch that he was, had enough sense to make that phone call. Joe Biden could make that phone call at any time on October 7th, November 7th, December 7th, January 7th. Kamala Harris could make a statement to that effect at any time, whether she had the power to exercise it or not. Ronald Reagan is caught on tape talking to Richard Nixon, saying that the African dignitaries and heads of state that were visiting the White House, he called them monkeys and said it was the first time they were wearing suits and shoes. That black-hearted devil knew to make that phone call. So what did Fred say about black imperialists? Kamala don't even have the sense. So this is somebody that her whole life has been to the right of Ronald Reagan. Right. Her whole life she's been to the right of Ronald Reagan. And these kids, to bring it back to you now, they ain't taking it. This next generation ain't taking it. I'll attest to what you said. When I started teaching on university campuses, first as a teaching assistant, as a graduate student, that would have been University of Pennsylvania in 1997 in the fall. When I was talking about anti-capitalism, when I was talking about anti-Zionism, and when I was talking about, police brutality, these kids really didn't want anything to do with it. 5% of my students would have probably gloss themselves as anti-capitalist. That's easily 60% now. Easily, right? Because the system has been stripped naked. They know that they have no stake in this. They know that they're just going to be exploited, never given a position to own a home, no ownership of anything. Go from the company store where you buy what you need to survive, to the company housing, to the company plant, until you die. Right? So they're checked out on capitalism. When I was talking about Palestinian liberation, because Kwame Ture told us to do that, because Malcolm told us to do that, because Thomas Sankara told us to do that, because Nelson Mandela told us to do that, 2% of the student population could hear it, and that 2% was Palestinian, right? They were the only people, essentially, that were hearing the message. Now that's 50%, 60%, 70%. And you can bear witness to this, you know, I would assume as well. When I was marching against police brutality, when they shot a kid on the south side of Minneapolis in his own backyard with a squirt gun, it was nothing but black folks in those marches. Now, white kids were outnumbering black folks 4-1. But because we did not organize against the system, we only mobilized around the issue. These blue devils have, you know, authorized all of these cop cities, all of these campus invasions with police. And police have killed more people in every single year since George Floyd was murdered. So, yeah, please do jump in. Stop me, because I realized it was getting dark fast. Yeah.
No,
Give us hope for the future.
Is true. I think that is true, that there has been the lack of, like, a lot of mobilization, but we have to understand how movement works. There are ebbs and there's flows, and there is more easy access to movement when there's heightened mobilization.
Yes.
But when that stops, how do people continue to be organized? The capitalist understands political organization. Political organization, the FBI, the CIA, Congress, Senate, the Pentagon. Like, you go down that list, they have political organization, the media conglomerates. We have to understand political organization in that way and be as serious as they are in building our political organizations. And I think, you know, in many ways, we live in a society that is allergic to political organization. But everything and anything that we've actually gained has been through the organization of the masses.
Yep.
Whether it is civil rights, whether it is the rights to vote, whether it is to be the rights to abortion,
labor movement,
all of these things, all of this have been gained through political organization. What have capitalists done? What they've done is decapitate those political organizations. And so we have a historic responsibility of building organizations that are strong enough to withstand the attacks of these people. And we have to be really serious about this moment, because regardless of who wins, they're seeking to shift the governance of this country, to limit the democratic rights that we've gained, whichever of the two. One will be more radical and more vocal about it, and the other one will be less vocal about it, but will most definitely concede to the most conservative elements of the ruling class. And they are already talking about attacks on immigrant rights. They're already talking about the expansion of war to hit China and Russia. Like, we have to be really clear on at the moment that we're headed to and what we need to do to fight back. And if we don't have political organizations, if we don't have people that are organizing as workers and building unions, if we don't have students that are organizing, building clear political organizations in their colleges, if we don't have people organizing in communities, we are going to be cut. Like Dominicans and Caribbeans say, we're going to be caught with our pants down, and we don't want that.
No, yeah. All I'll say, I'm going to let you, mic drop on this call to action for us, because I want to make sure that you can keep those sacred familial commitments. An honor to share virtual space with you again. It's been, one of it has been a kind of signal, point of light that I've been able to have, quite a few conversations with you now on this trail. Looking forward to fighting shoulder to shoulder with you in subsequent struggles. Can everybody that's gathered give a round of applause for Claudia de la Cruz?
Thank you so much, my dear brother and comrade. Thank you.
Oh, they can't hear you until they stop catcalling. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be in conversation with you. I definitely look forward to more conversations and building the alternative that the working class people need in this country. Obviously, much love to Dr. Jill Stein.
Yeah.
Much love to you. And to everyone that's in this space. We will continue to struggle together, and we will be a force to be reckoned with. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
All right, appreciate you, comrade.
Love.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, peace. And for the first time all weekend, we are ending on time. So everybody, we are officially on break until 3 p.m. When we reconvene, we will be reconvening at Campbell Hall, the big rotunda-shaped building that's about 100 yards north of where we are currently situated. And we will have a number of addresses. You'll hear again from Anwar Hadid. You will hear Dr. Jill Stein's keynote. You will hear the singer-songwriter talent of Shyla Ray, Daisy Draper. And if you have not yet heard a vice presidential candidate spit bars over beats that he himself made, yeah, then y'all are in for a treat. I'll see y'all in a little bit. Yeah.